The battlefield is everywhere. We can use military commissions right here. You know, typically military commissions were used on a battlefield where there's no time to gather evidence later on. Now they're used years later because it's an effort to try to militarize the government. Those are perhaps the most egregious examples of how much all of our liberties now in a legal concept are at the sufferance of the president. Phil said, this is President Bush began it and President Obama reiterated, the authority unilaterally declared to kill any American, really any place, not just abroad because the battlefield is any place, that he decides is, in his terms, a continuous and imminent threat to United States interests. We know what imminent means these days, right? It's not you've got ocular evidence of something going to happen. It's that it may be a breeding ground for some evil that could emerge like Athena from Zeus's brain 15, 20, 50 years in the future. This is not a caricature. In fact, it was reported in the New York Times that shortly after 9/11, Bush summoned his wise men. None of them would have qualified to sit at the Constitutional Convention, but we'll put that aside. The wise men said, no, we not only have to target abroad all those countries that are currently harboring terrorists, but those who could be breeding grounds. Any place that doesn't have a viable democracy that looks like the United States. Then the list gets long and longer. Indonesia, Yemen, Jordan, Qatar, everywhere in the world. That was the idea. And again, it's this no-risk idea of life. You have to eliminate any conceivable evil, and that justifies all resources, military power, arbitrary authority whatsoever. And no one will stand up and say, you know, even though we understand 9/11 was an abomination, there's got to be some risk that it can happen again. We want it to be small, but we have to live with that idea. Otherwise, we will be everywhere locking up anybody at anybody's whim. And our legal construct, although there are political restraints that are prevented from happening, now authorize the president to turn the United States into a police state because it's all a battlefield. You know, during one of the investigations, the Lackawanna 5 terrorists that were conspiring to go train in a training camp abroad, the idea was suggested that they should send the military to go effectuate the arrest rather than the police. Now, early on, that was rejected. Just like at one time in the United States, no one got alarmed when the Richard Reed was arrested and given Miranda warnings after he was captured off the plane. Now suddenly, years later, oh my gosh, Miranda warnings, the Constitution of the United States, what have become? Paying attention to the Constitution, it's a scrap of paper. And really, conservatives and liberals have to get together, the country has to get together around the idea of constitutional law, because process, due process, the most important words ever invented in the history of civilization. It conveys the idea that you can get it wrong. You have to have hearings. You can be arbitrary. You have to have opportunities to respond. That is now out the window. No hearings whatsoever. I remember I testified in opposition to the Military Commissions Act because it suspended habeas corpus, as the Supreme Court later said in the Boumediene case. And these are members of the Senate on the Judicial Committee, some sat on state Supreme Courts. Mr. Fine, they're all guilty as can be. They're all terrorists, and they haven't had a trial yet. Not only that, just to show you how wrong you can get in this war on terror, because the images. Guantanamo Bay. After the Supreme Court finally held in Boumediene that they have a right to a hearing to determine whether they satisfy the elements of an enemy combatant, which is very broad. It basically says if you're associated or you're signed up in secret ink for Al-Qaeda, you can be detained for life without accusation or charge. After they finally granted that right, the administration has lost something like 85 to 90% of every single case brought, even though they can rely on secret evidence. Now, you want to show the level of injustice. I had the opportunity to represent and help 17 Uyghurs. They're Chinese Muslims in East Turkestan. Their leader, in fact, is Rebbe Kadir. Her office is Qadi Corner from the White House. She's been nominated 3 times for the Nobel Peace Prize. In fact, visited George Bush before he traipsed off to Beijing to marvel at these physical wonders. And there's 17 of them were detained for over 7 years at Guantanamo as enemy combatants, threats to the United States. What had they done? No, they hadn't threatened any American, hadn't killed any American. In fact, they hated the Chinese and thought the Americans would be their allies. But they, in training themselves, happened to be in Afghanistan at the time 9/11 occurred. And we, in an effort to make certain that we had the stage props to show we're at war, were handing out huge bounties to those in Afghanistan who would point to someone and say, Al-Qaeda. In fact, we were advertising. You bring in Al-Qaeda, you can have a lifetime pension on the Riviera. And Rabiulu Dictu, hey, we got all these Al-Qaeda folks. After they held there for 7 years, the United States itself finally conceded, yeah, they're really not enemy combatants. Now, then at the district judge stage, the judge said, all right, I'm going to release them into the United States. Said the United States, he asked the U.S. attorney, you have any evidence that they would be a danger? They've stayed there so long, everyone agreed if they were returned to China, they'd be tortured or executed, which has happened frequently to others whom the Chinese have gotten their hands on. The Uyghurs, in some sense, like the Tibetans, want a more autonomous state in East Turkestan. And the Justice Department said, no, we've got no evidence that there would be danger, but they are illegal aliens. We captured them, they had no green cards, they can't come to the United States. Sort of shocking to the judge. But that's the position that the Obama administration took as well. They're illegal aliens, so we've got to continue to detain them. Case went up to the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals, in fact, reversed the decision to release the Uyghurs into the United States, and that case now is in the United States Supreme Court. That will be argued in a couple months' time. But in the meantime, the administration has tried to moot that particular litigation. It wouldn't send them back to China. It would be in violation of the Refugee Convention. So we were worried that the Chinese would be angry if we let them remain in the United States. These are 17, and being housed by a 3-time Nobel laureate nominee. So we then searched the globe and said, we need the Chinese to buy our debt that we were pointed out, $1 trillion debts. So maybe Paley would take some, shop them out, and bribe other countries into taking the Uyghurs because we were too cowardly to defend the integrity of our own principles. It was one of the most shameful efforts, I think, in my entire life. So we have this idea after 9/11, the president shreds the Constitution, and we end up imprisoning, detaining people wrongly, because the Constitution was made in recognition that human beings are fallible. They can overreach. They put in institutional structures that would try to blunt the more degraded elements of mankind in their ambitions. And I want to focus on the war power, because that's the one that has been most abused, vivisected, tortured, mangled by administrations in the last decades. Remember the doctrine of original intent, which I think is a sound one. You try to interpret the Constitution not as a homonym of what it was. Sounds the same, means the opposite. But really, what the Founding Fathers intended it to mean and to accomplish. And if there are defects, you amend them, like we have 28 times. Indeed, perhaps our most important amendments were the first 10 amendments to the Bill of Rights. The Founding Fathers didn't say, well, the judges can make it up as they go along. We need to amend the document. Now, what was enshrined into the memories of the Founding Fathers was the inclination of executives everywhere in the world to fight wars for the sake of domination and control by itself. War for the sake of war. Most people find that rather unusual, but the human species is that way, like a lot of other species. We just get a psychic thrill out of domination, even if it makes you less safe, less wealthy. And all during the decades before 1776, when the Founding Fathers looked out at Europe, all they found the wars, endless wars, the British Empire fighting endless wars for no purpose whatsoever. Indeed, Edmund Burke was advised very presciently. He said, we are acquiring new territories, not only North America, but South Africa, Burma, India is expanding. He said, you know what? This is going to be the ruination of us, because I dread, Burke said, that we will be too much dreaded. We will come to believe we can't abuse our power. And we will come to destroy ourselves.